Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Diana Skaya. Friedrich Merz, the leader of Germany's center-right Christian Democrats, is reportedly set to meet with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk in Warsaw on Tuesday. This is what the Polish press agency reports. Now, talks are reportedly to be centered on supporting Ukraine. Now, this meeting follows Merz's surprise visit to Kyiv Monday. Now, these visits do come ahead of Germany's upcoming snap elections. And as the conservative candidate for chancellor, Merz said he wanted to access Ukraine's defense situation firsthand and reaffirm Germany's support. Now, joining me now in studio to discuss the significance of these visits and the broader implications for German-Ukrainian relations is Andreas Umland, Stockholm Centre for Eastern European Studies. Andreas, welcome to the program. So good to have you here on World Talks.
Thanks for having me.
So now, Friedrich Merz's visit to Kyiv, that was yesterday. What was first the message that he was trying to just point out here? I mean, Germany's snap elections are coming up. How significant was that visit?
Symbolically, I think it was quite significant. It came shortly after the chancellor, the current, went to Kyiv. And Merz had a slightly different tone than Scholz in Kyiv. He spoke about weapons deliveries, and in Kyiv and already before, he had made indications that he would be ready to reopen the old question of the Taurus cruise missiles, which is something important for Ukraine. The other interesting thing he said in Kyiv was that he thinks it's necessary to create what he called a contact group of European countries, not only EU countries, not only Poland, France, and Germany, but also the UK. And that this contact group would then be devoted to the Ukrainian issue. There was something similar in 2014, 2015, that was the so-called Normandy format, but that, for instance, excluded Poland, but also Britain and the US. And now he seems to be suggesting a new structure that is to be created, and that would be only welcome. And also his visit, if it's indeed true that he comes to Poland now, is also pointing, I think, in the right direction.
You said a lot of interesting things there, Andreas. So we just have news that reportedly Merz will be in Poland. However, he is to have a closed meeting and behind closed doors at the German embassy. What do you think that these meetings might entail?
I don't know the diplomatic niceties and protocols, because he is still the opposition leader. He will most likely be the next chancellor of Germany, which has to do a lot with the German electoral system and coalition constellation and the different coalitions that are possible, the parties that are excluded from coalition building, those who are included in coalition building. That's why most observers in Germany think that he will be the next chancellor. And so he's sort of testing the ground already, and that's why perhaps this meeting is now taking place in the German embassy. I guess it will be not just with the German diplomats, but also with Polish representatives.
Let me take you just back to our first question here. You mentioned about Merz discussing to provide the Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine, and also about the European allies. But first, let me ask you this. How likely is it that Germany will take this step? And if so, what would it mean for the broader European stance on arms support for Ukraine?
I think it's a complicated issue, because Scholz has been reflecting and shaping the German public opinion concerning these cruise missiles of the Taurus type. He has been reflecting a majority of Germans who are paradoxically somewhat against delivering this particular weapon, although also a majority of Germans are in favor of military support for Ukraine, and even of increasing military support for Ukraine. But still, a majority are, and that is a success of the Russian propaganda campaign, they fear delivering this particular weapon because they think this would draw Germany into the war. It would be the start of World War III, nuclear war, and so on. So there are these fears. Somewhat surprisingly, Merz has nevertheless spoken repeatedly about giving these Tauruses to Ukraine. But for me, it's still an open question whether he will have the power and the sort of social support once he becomes chancellor to actually make this true.
You're saying you're sure he will become Germany's next chancellor?
I mean, that's what most. I mean, it has a lot to do with the German electoral and political system. You know, it's almost impossible. You know, I'm not sure that he will become, but it's almost impossible that somebody else will become. It's more like a negative calculation that who else could it be, and what other coalition could there be, and there are no other options. So he becomes chancellor, and he will probably try to solve this issue somehow, but I'm not yet sure he will be able to do that easily. One thing I've already suggested also in Ukrainian media is that perhaps Ukraine could go a step in the sort of German direction and request these Taurus missiles for exclusive use on Ukrainian state territory, not for use on Russian state territory, because that seems to be, in fact, the most touchy issues for most Germans.
And how feasible is that?
That is a question then to ask Ukrainian diplomats and politicians. They would know whether this is something, but that seems to be really the fear that most Germans have, that German rockets, missiles will fly into Russia, and then Putin would retaliate on German territory. I think if there would be an explicit deal that it would be solely used on Ukrainian state territory, then this would make things for Scholz for Merz much easier.
Andreas, Merz's plan includes France and the UK, as you mentioned earlier, as key partners in a European alliance for Ukraine. How do you think they can work together with Germany to strengthen military and political support for Ukraine? Of course, without, you also mentioned that they fear that it could possibly cause, not World War III. How can that be balanced out?
Well, I mean, what we need here is clearly the cooperation between the major Central and West European countries to have a strong alliance, especially in the case that the US withdraws from this whole issue, which is a possibility. And then if these four countries are together, this will be, most of the industrial and military power that Europe has. One could add to this the Scandinavian countries, other East Central European countries that are very pro-Ukrainian, and then one would have actually a coalition, and then one could imagine a sort of a combination of different capabilities. So Germany, for instance, has a good military industrial capability, but a weak military, whereas other countries may not have as strong an industrial base, but stronger militaries, and so these different countries could then combine their strength and also could then perhaps more effectively seek ways to help Ukraine.
Andreas, let me shift you here a little bit. Zelensky spoke out saying that he raised the prospect of a role for foreign troops in Ukraine until it can join NATO. What is your take on that?
That is very much favored in Ukraine, and it would, of course, also change then the nature of the conflict that Ukraine is in, because then, especially if NATO troops are on Ukrainian soil, that would totally change the character of the war. And so Ukraine is interested, obviously, in that. The question is whether, Western countries will agree to that, whether they can agree on this with NATO. There would have to be then some sort of backing from NATO, from the US for that. But I think it's high time to start with this, at least with deploying troops on the western part of Ukraine, for instance, to protect the, let's say, the Ukrainian-Polish border or the Ukrainian-Romanian border, and also from the Ukrainian side, because also Romania or Slovakia or Poland have an interest in their own borders to be protected.
Let me ask you this now. If Donald Trump actually pushes for a shift in his policy towards Ukraine, how is it going to impact Europe's position on the conflict? Is Germany and possibly other EU countries going to have to step in to try to adjust their strategy, their tactics?
If the US withdraws either fully or partly, certainly there would have to be a huge adjustment to basically replace the US as a political, military, and financial and economic supporter of Ukraine, and then the costs will also rise. One has to say that I think the EU is actually already thinking about this quite actively. We have now, I think, a very well-chosen new EU Commission with people who are actually from the region, who understand this conflict well. And we will need a major shift in the whole setup of the EU and trans-European cooperation, including the UK, to basically fill the gap then if the US withdraws, as many fear.
Thank you so much, Andreas Umland from the Stockholm Centre for Eastern European Studies, for breaking it down for us here on TVP World Talks.
Thanks for having me.
And that's all for this edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching.